Hi, everybody. My name is Nathan Piccini. I'm one of the marketing managers at Data Science Dojo. Uh, Today, we have Jordan Ross, a program manager at Microsoft. He works within their cybersecurity department. He's going to be going over data analysis challenges in cybersecurity. If you do have questions, like I just mentioned, feel free to use the raise your hand function if you're on Zoom, or leave your question in the Q&A tab. We will have points within the presentation where Jordan's going to pause and answer some questions. If you're on YouTube, feel free to ask. I'll make sure to ask Jordan during those pauses. And so, Jordan, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Absolutely, and thanks, Nathan. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Ross, and as Nathan called out, I'm a security-focused program manager where I'm really focused actually on product overall at Microsoft. And so when I work in product, I'm really looking at Microsoft's Azure-based security solutions that we provide for security management. And so today I'm talking to y'all about where data analysis factors into cybersecurity and the cybersecurity product landscape overall. It's a huge challenge that cybersecurity focuses in, which is synthesizing and analyzing complex data sets that are humongous and informing organizations where they should make their investments and enhance their security. And so data science definitely applies to this, applies to where investments should be made. Day to day, I work with meeting with customers, enterprise customers, and government organizations to figure out how they should be planning out their cybersecurity product adoption, where they are in their journey, and factoring that feedback into our roadmap and our product planning. And so if after the presentation, you want to connect with me further, you definitely can. You can either follow my contributions to the Microsoft security community. If you're focused in that area, I have some videos there as well as some of my teammates. And then also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn also. But when we talk about cybersecurity, there's a lot of major roles that will interact with security data. And so to just give you an understanding of who those roles, who those players might be in any organization, and if you are aspiring to enter the world of where security meets data analytics, I definitely recommend focusing on these areas. These are really the core roles that I come across with meeting with various organizations. And when we talk about reviewing security signals and making sure that organizations are protected, probably the most pivotal member of any security operations center, which is SOC for short, is a security analyst. And security analysts come in multiple different levels too. And so organizations typically have a tier 1 analyst that does typical triaging and reviewing to make sure that when something is seen as suspicious or potentially malicious, that they confirm that it truly is. And there's a lot of false positives out there that need to be combed through. And once we know that it is a true positive or it's something complex, then that's typically dealt with by a tier 2 security analyst. They are the people that are out there every day that are reviewing an entire organization's estate and making sure that it is protected. There's also the security researcher out there. That's typically someone that's looking at trends, understanding different indicators of compromise or IOCs when it comes to threat intelligence data to make sure that they understand what emerging threats are out there and where a organization needs to make its investments in developing new detections and understanding where the organization needs to grow in terms of that security oversight. Then after that, there is a SOC or Security Operations Center manager. They manage across how organizations respond to threats. And one of the most frequent questions that I hear from SOC managers is, how do we assess the performance of how we're reviewing security signals? How do we know where we should make our key investments if we want to build automation, things like that. And so they're really looking at measuring the investment and understanding their performance. And you can sure bet that data is definitely part of that. And then lastly, the security engineer. Someone really needs to build the way that we detect malicious activity. They need to build different artifacts, make sure that our tools and our platforms are working for us and are continuously improving. And for a lot of different cloud-based tools out there or on-premises security tools, it takes a lot of configuring and building out queries, building out data ingestion pipelines, things like that, that a security engineer needs to focus on in developing. Based off of the size of the organization, you might see one of these roles doing multiple parts of this. And maybe you have a security engineer that's performing as a researcher and a security analyst all within their one job. And so it really depends on the size of the organization and how much investment they have within their security operations. But every organization out there needs to have a security mindset to them. The way that different organizations have been moving to a more digital format and the way that exploitations of digital environments have been increasing across the globe has really highlighted that security is top of mind to many organizations out there, and vulnerabilities are not accepted by end customers, whether that's a B2B business or B2C. That definitely there is scrutiny when it comes to breaches that organizations need to mitigate, and they do that through investments of security. And so we've seen a lot of investment in the space, and these are the roles that we typically interact with. So security overall, why do we look at it? What is the big issue going on? And so I'm sure y'all have seen the headlines of breaches and exploitations from large businesses that have populated the news feed. I'll touch more on that a little later. But in terms of the main challenges that we see when organizations are furthering their need for cybersecurity platforms and tools to provide for their organizations, the first one comes with modernization. Organizations are increasing their investments in modern applications and digital migration. And so 82% of organizations are committed to moving their large-scale applications to the cloud. And with that migration comes the need for security oversight. And there's this huge increase in the amount of security signals that are received from those resources now too. And so the more modernization you see, the more remote workforce that you see across the world, it means more data signals that need to be monitored to make sure that they're not being exploited by potentially malicious actors out there. In layman's terms, that could mean a hacker out there. And so the more an organization modernizes, we need to monitor to make sure that they're not being exploited. And so, as I said, this digital transformation is occurring and the number of signals is increasing. 63% of organizations find that managing cybersecurity is more difficult than it was 2 years ago. And part of that is because the amount of signals or raw events, any activity that a user has, such as signing in, accessing a certain application, or executing a certain process, any of these activities can potentially be logged. And this array of signals needs to be monitored to make sure that it's not suspicious. And so as this number of raw events is increasing, we rely on our security operations centers or our SOCs, and some companies even outsource this to security vendors out there to manage, that there needs to be people that can actually investigate. And there's a challenge there too. 70% of organizations have expressed that it's extremely difficult to hire for these roles. This really highlights a job shortage. And it's a job shortage, one, there's just not enough people out there that are focused on cybersecurity and understand how to monitor these logs, these digital logs, to assess if an attack took place. But then also the tools that these security professionals need to work with. Are they designed for security in mind? Are they designed to really help them understand the data trends that are hitting the organization? And a lot of these tools require a lot of customization. Some are really great about being built for security professionals. Others really require that you're an IT professional. I should have started this conversation really highlighting that I do come from a Microsoft background. So a lot of my knowledge on the subject comes from the Microsoft products that we do have out there. So as you have questions, I'll try my best to answer you in terms of the legacy players out there, other members that provide security solutions, but forgive me if this is leaning a little more on Microsoft solutions as we go. But you can be rest assured that these challenges are true for most, if not all, organizations out there, no matter what security vendors that they are using. But with that, just with the start of this security landscape, the challenges that we're seeing overall across organizations of all sizes and governments. So one of the huge issues that I pointed out before is the quantity of signals that an organization could be monitoring. And one thing that highlights is collection is not detection. And so if an organization is switching over to the cloud, or they have a hybrid environment where they have signals coming from all over the world, all different types of resources, it could be easy to say, all right, anywhere where there's a log, let's monitor it. Let's make sure that nothing suspicious is occurring. But that massively increases the amount that your security operations center needs to monitor, and they need to investigate and make sure that nothing suspicious is occurring. But not all of these log sources are really applicable for actually monitoring. And so it comes to this kind of like data hygiene conversation. Which logs are really important, or which are the vital data sets to actually monitor? It's a challenge that a lot of organizations have, that they don't know where to make this security focus, where to make these investments. And so it's easy to say, collect everything and then build your detections or those alerts for security signals off of it. But there's a couple reasons why that might not be a good idea. And number one, it's expensive. Monitoring your security signals from a personnel perspective can be costly in terms of the time management of your team, but then also the platforms that you're using to monitor that data. Data storage for massive millions and millions of events every day can be quite costly, as well as actually analyzing that information. Maybe you're using a tool, a product out there, maybe it's a security information and event management system that's monitoring all of your data. And if you are ingesting every aspect of your data out there, even if it's not security related, that can be quite costly to both manage, ingest, and to store. The next piece is you're having your security operations center actually review all of this activity. Unless you have a fair amount of automation and machine learning baked in, that's tossing away all of the non-critical information or non-suspicious information, that's a lot of time consumption for your security operations center. And so making sure that you're only collecting what is really pertinent and related to a potential breach is important to do. Otherwise, you'll find that your security operations center is just exhausted and they don't have the time to actually investigate what is suspicious. I already talked about the storage component, but it also comes with making those investments in machine learning and automation, making sure that you have the data sets there where your automation can run quickly and your machine learning has the right models to learn from in terms of anomalies out there. And so making sure that you are only collecting security related data is important to do with this, as well as business application critical information. And then the last component, being mindful of regulatory restrictions. No matter where you are in the world, chances are that there is regulation in terms of how long you need to store logs, what logs you actually need to monitor, and what logs you can't monitor too, depending on personal identifiable information rules in whichever country you're acting in. You may not be able to collect certain aspects of customer identities to actually monitor here. And so it's really important to be mindful of where you should be collecting data and what data you should be keeping top of mind from a data science perspective of factoring that into an organization's investments. So just a couple things to be aware of before you go down the route of monitoring security data or an organization's data overall. And so just to pull this back into the context of why are we doing this? Why are we making this big investment to monitor any of this data? I mean, if you look at the first bullet point and you see cost right there, you might say, all right, well, my organization doesn't have the finances to monitor security data, but you kind of look at the cost of what if you don't do anything at all? And you see these headlines pop up, which seems daily, depending on which news outlet you're looking at. And it happens all the time, from the robocalls that you get on your phone, and your phone could be part of an organization's endpoints right there. Whereas you as an individual being breached could impact an organization all up. And phishing scams, attempts to compromise users based off of password scanning attempts and initial breaches is on the rise. And you can see a whole marketplace out there in the dark web of people purchasing passwordless and attempts to compromise users and organizations, either from an information stealing landscape or also for ransom and consuming capital from an organization. And so just a couple headlines that I have out here, but you're seeing this dramatic rise in phishing attempts, easy ways to look across an organization and say, all right, I'm going to try all of these passwords across all of these users. And I know that this organization says after 5 failed password attempts, we are going to block the user from gaining access to our environment. So part of this phishing attempt, we're only going to attempt the password 4 times, so it doesn't raise up a signal. And so these attacks are happening all the time, and understanding the trends that these attacks play on and making sure an organization is monitoring this activity so an attack can be stopped early on so a breach doesn't happen is really important, and where cybersecurity is vital to any organization out there. And it's not just, accessing someone by sending them an email and saying, click on this link. It's also looking at how this can impact devices that we work with every day, IoT devices, cars even being hacked. All of these devices, all of these digital resources are potentially exposed to attackers out there, if not protected with cybersecurity proactive measures. And then the last headline, which I didn't touch on, is one of the farthest reaching and biggest headline attacks that you may have heard of recently within the past year, which is the SolarWinds attack. And what you see in this attack, as well as with many of the high profile attacks, are attacks that are being orchestrated by nation state based actors. And so different, very invested in organizations that are trying to compromise governments. And with the SolarWinds attack, if you aren't aware of it, I definitely recommend researching it a little bit more. But just to give you, the high level aspects of what this attack was, but attacks have been growing in their sophistication. An attempt by a adversarial group to the US government that was focused on injecting malware into the source code of a software update. And by hiding that compromised code, gaining access into anyone that was part of that Orion software update, where you potentially had those organizations' information accessed, if not protected. And so attackers are becoming more and more sophisticated and making sure that their signals or indicators of compromise are hidden and that they can erase their tracks, and doing something like hiding into a software update through the initial breaching into someone clicking on a link when they shouldn't have because it was masked properly, can result in all of these different industries being affected. Even though this was an attack focused on the US government, you can see that organizations that were impacted by this, 44% of those were IT related, 18% were directly within the government. And this is based off of the data that Microsoft had in terms of which organizations they were aware of, where signs of the breach were found. And then really what you're seeing here is access into information. Think tanks and NGOs that are being attacked, those are organizations that have governmental influence. And so this rise in sophistication of attacks isn't purely about stealing information, but also injecting an influence. And so I definitely recommend looking up this breach and many others that are hitting headlines to really understand, this is what organizations don't want to see. They don't want to be attacked, and making sure that they are making security investments and having detections built in to find early signs of these attacks and blocking them right away is very vital for their organizations to continue, both from their own protecting their customers' data perspective, but also making sure that they are a trusted partner within society. All right, so let's look at the size of the data. I just have a demo environment that I captured from this, so not a lot of investment. Organizations will have millions and millions and millions of events occurring. And I'm just looking at one data source right here, security events on a Windows machine. That's all I'm really looking at. I have a number of Windows machines that this environment is monitoring, but definitely not with the investment of an entire organization. And just looking at these numbers, within 24 hours for one event, which is at the top 8002, a process was allowed to run 29,000, almost 30,000 instances, events where that happened. Something that is probably more important for someone within monitoring security signals to look at is 4625, an account failed to log on or a new process has been created. So something like this, an account failed to log on, over 400,000 of these events. It would be pretty easy for someone to say, all right, let's investigate those 400,000 events, but that is a whole lot for our organization to investigate. And the truth is, going back to those numbers that I shared with you at the very beginning, there's just not enough personnel out there to actually investigate this information. A data scientist needs to be able to build queries, filter out what the false positives are, what is the risk tolerance of an organization needs to be factored in too. And the way that this is made simple, rather than making each of those individual customizations, is a focus on tooling too. And so there's tools out there that data scientists, security analysts, security engineers, and researchers can use to actually assist their organization, but still prioritizing and understanding where an organization needs to make their further investments is still important to do and is a manual effort. One of the best tools in terms of prioritizing is called a CSPM, or a Cloud Security Posture Management tool. This allows an organization to view its resources either in the cloud or on-prem and understand how they should prioritize their time, how secure are they, and what are their vulnerabilities across different resources out there. And so there's a number of different players in the game for this. I'll talk a little bit about CSPM in just a little bit. But another platform out there is Cloud Workload Protection Platforms, CWPP. How do we know if an attack has taken place? And how do we reduce the attack surface? This is a way that you can both have a reactive security mindset to already receive alerts out there. So these are typically machine learning or vendor provided detections. Maybe that is the role of a data scientist right there, actually building out the detections for an organization to monitor what threats could be coming in, but actually having proactive security measures too. And this, equipped with the CSPM, could tell you as much as you want with responding to threats, but making sure that you actually know where to make the investments is important. Then from an investigation standpoint, security event information and event management to actually investigate, bring it all into one context, and SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response to actually respond to a security signal. So let's dig a little deeper into each of these platforms. CSPM to start off with. This equips an organization with whichever vendor they chose for this product, what their view of the security best practices are out there. A lot of the time, they map to these regulatory assessments like ISO 27001, NIST for financial organizations, SOC TSP. There's a lot of them out there, and mapping each of the configurations for a infrastructure or PaaS resource out there to make sure that their configuration maps to good security hygiene is really important for an organization, and a CSPM does just that. But again, they need help prioritizing. How important is it for them to work on one best practice over another? And a lot of these CSPM tools, they do that prioritization for an organization, but it's the roles behind the scenes, studying the amount of threats out there, understanding the threat landscape that really fuel this prioritization. Again, like organizations are hybrid, they have multi-cloud, and bringing in the context of all of these environments into one area is really vital. And then from all of those resources, visualizing what the vulnerabilities are. So how many instances of that kind of vulnerability an organization has helps them understand the magnitude of the issue. And lastly, I've already talked about prioritization a fair amount. And so this tool, CSPM, Microsoft is Azure Security Center. There's other platforms out there too, but they're really important tools to understand what the security posture is of an organization, but an organization still needs to take action. And a lot of the time, they're looking for their security analysts and their SOC managers to tell them where they should be prioritizing their time and their engineers with making these improvements. And so the role of a data scientist definitely applies with building these detections, building the prioritization, understanding the threat landscape, but also telling the story of where an organization needs to make its investments, and doing that through reporting and through visualizations is really important. Next, detecting the attack. So cloud workload protection, that CWPP area, it is continuous monitoring of all of the activity hitting those cloud or on-prem based resources and understanding where an attack took place. A data scientist could be able to create those queries, understand what attacks have been made, or monitor all of the reported alerts, because even though a tool could say, hey, we think that these activities are suspicious, you should investigate, someone still needs to confirm that it is a true positive and it should be highlighted as a breach. So just because it's alerted doesn't mean it actually is malicious. It's just a suspicion that it is. And then also using machine learning to correlate raw events. This definitely is more applicable in the security information and event management platform, but I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then once you do have your vulnerabilities, knowing how you are going to actually patch those and repair those. This is a tool that helps you alert, understand what the attack surface is, and gives you tools to actually reduce it. But again, organizations need to know where they should prioritize their time because they just don't have enough people in the space. And it can be costly to divert their engineers that are building solutions for their customers to actually focus on security and make patches. Security information event management. This could be called SIM or SIEM, depending on where in the world you might be. But within the SIM space, which is how I pronounce it, this synthesizes security signals and critical log sources that an organization could have from all over the place. It could be something like Dynamics 365 or Salesforce or a Slack channel, or it could be a firewall out there from Palo Alto. Wherever the security related signals are, even if they're on-prem, an organization needs to bring them into one context to understand the full threat landscape or the full security story. If suspicious activity is detected, where did it reach into? And chances are that an attacker, when they are navigating through an environment, that they're making hops. It's going across multiple different resources, cloud applications, and identities. And it might be more than what one platform or one log source can detect. A huge issue area when it comes to SIM is with schema management. All of these data sources from all of these different platforms could be reporting their data in a different schema, and making sure if detections of suspicious activity are built, that that schema and those data sources are normalized, or detections understand the context of these different solutions to really correlate these signals together to make it workable for an organization to investigate. And so as much as you can use these platforms to hunt for emerging threats or to receive alerts, it's really up to someone to get their hands dirty with the data, build detections, and understand how one platform that might be reporting its signals using common event format or CEF to another data source that is using a custom format that's really only true to their organization. And so when data is kind of listed in these different languages in a way, different schemas, someone needs to correlate all of this data together in one place. The SIM, or Security Information Event Management, is a platform to do that, but someone actually needs to build it and build the correlations there. New players in the game or the next gen SIMs out there do have a lot of capabilities to do that enrichment and do the correlation and normalization, but most organizations have a manual effort where they still need to be able to build that in. And then also, as emerging threats are seen, and a SIM might come with a lot of alerts built in with it, but someone needs to continue to continuously improve those detections or build new ones. And that's up to someone who is able to work with complex queries and large data sets and can understand the trends. But for scalability, then we look at SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response. As I said, we have confined resources. There's only so many security analysts. So then we look at automation components, machine learning to mitigate threats as they're going, so that our investigators only have to investigate what's most likely to be a true positive. SOAR is a huge component of this. Built-in machine learning is another. So if you are focused on building machine learning, I believe I mentioned some security tools. One's called Notebooks that we use to build that out. But another one that's a really easy entry point is a low-code, no-code automation solution. Microsoft is called Azure Logic Apps to do so. It's a Power Platform. There's other organizations out there that have these low-code, no-code solutions to build automation. But again, organizations need to know where they should be making these investments because they only have so much time. And then once they know where they want to build the investments, someone to actually make these tools. And there's some parsing that will need to be done most likely. If you're doing data enrichment, understanding how you're going to bring in that schema and enrich your already ingested data sets is a huge challenge where a data scientist, their context would help a lot here. And I'll just pause for questions again. Any with regard to the platforms out there?
There is one about SQL.
Okay.
So is SQL important to cybersecurity?
Absolutely. And so depending on which platforms are out there, almost every security platform has querying capabilities. At the end of the day, when you're receiving a security recommendation or when you're receiving an alert that something suspicious did occur, you actually need to review the raw logs. Or if you're building an alert, you need to build a query. And so building those queries, for the most part, a lot of the languages go back to SQL and actually querying that data set. Microsoft uses something called Custo query language, which I go over here. Other organizations use things like the Splunk search processing language. Maybe another platform uses PowerShell or Python. There are different querying languages. There's some tools that are used to translate across multiple platforms, and organizations that are trying to switch from legacy on-prem solutions to cloud-based solutions will definitely be looking at help with translation of queries too. But these engines aren't completely ready for an enterprise to actually use. A lot of manual effort is still needed. And so understanding standard query language is really important with being able to determine whether a threat is occurring, building new queries to search for suspicious activity. And then on the other side, a SQL database is a prime target for an attack. So not just, querying through data, but actually where your data is being stored, and making sure that that SQL database is protected is a prime component of any security investigation or security posture management tool out there, and making sure that you understand how to build those queries to detect threats that could be impacting those tools is important. Again, there are platforms out there like CWPP and like SIM that actually provide you detections, but more often than not, an organization is going to want someone to build more detections of suspicious signals on top of that. And a great way to brush up on, how to understand what a security signal is, look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and they do a good job of listing out different tactics that attackers use and techniques that they use to compromise organizations. Any other questions on the platform, or were we good on that component?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, great. So to further your information, your education on the subject, I definitely recommend some future learning. I already mentioned the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which I didn't mention here. Another one that I mentioned just verbally was reviewing the SolarWinds attack or the SolarWinds attack. And other different headlines in the news about security challenges that organizations are facing. But in terms of proving to organizations that you have the education and the background to equip their organization from a cybersecurity landscape, here are a few certifications that I'm aware of and that I interact with a lot that analysts and security engineers really excel at when they're within an organization. The industry standard really looks at this ISC2 CISSP certification. The Certified Ethical Hacker is a really great one to understand different methods that attackers use. And then some Microsoft specific certifications are listed here too. And so if you are new to the space, all of these have different learning modules associated with them. My, learning module of choice is either LinkedIn Learning or Pluralsight. And so there's tons of modules to help you ramp up for these certifications, lots of books on the subject that some of my teammates have written or teach courses in. But these are really great ways to show that you understand security, and also are great ways to learn on the topic of security. So that was all of the content that I wanted to share with you today. And just with the rest of the time, I just wanted to open back up for just open Q&A. I believe there was one question at the top in terms of roles related or job opportunities for this? Nathan, was there one?
Well, it was about skills and certifications, and I think you just covered that. So,
and I did it. Okay. So I guess the rest of the time is for all of y'all out there. Any questions for me that I didn't get to, other things that you want to hear about with regards to where cyber meets data security or data analysis and science?
yeah, so if you have any questions, if you're on YouTube, feel free to post them and I'll read them out. If you're on Zoom, you can put them in the Q&A function or raise your hand and I can give you a live mic. All right.
And if you don't
looks
have any other, oh, is there one?
Looks like one person. Yep. So Talk, why don't you go ahead, unmute yourself?
Cool. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Awesome. Perfect. So my question is, I was wondering if you can maybe elaborate or comment on, in the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that there's a lot of false positives that causes SOC fatigue. And I was wondering if you can maybe comment on some ML techniques that you've used or things that you've considered to minimize that false positive rate.
Yeah, so whenever I meet with organizations, what I first try to do when they talk to me about a particularly noisy alert, probably one of the most common ones is going to be an unfamiliar sign-in. Organizations talk about that all the time now, especially with the remote workforce, that if an organization was completely in person before and now they're all remote, now they're having all of these sign-ins and it's triggering a lot of alerts for their organization. And so what I would start off is meeting with my stakeholders and saying, all right, what is suspicious here? More often than not, they're going to say, all right, we have this list that we keep that lists all of the employees with their home office locations. And if they log in a place other than that, or outside of a 50-mile radius, something like that, that's when we want to be alerted on. And so that's a custom detection that needs to be built in, or a external data enrichment that needs to happen, because that might not be associated with our identity platform where their home offices are listed. And so starting from, what is their risk tolerance? It might also start off with they can log in from wherever they are, but if they have 5 failed logins, that would be suspicious. And then building the queries based off of that, either enrichment or risk tolerance, is the way to go. I also recommend for organizations, before they invest in making an alert a raw detection that would actually cause their analysts to begin to investigate, to try it out as something called a hunting query. A lot of these investigation platforms, and something that you can do manually too, is just proactively perform the query ahead of time. See how many hits you have. If you have 1,000 hits on a query, either your organization is under a serious attack or the query is just not fine-tuned enough. And so going from that kind of landscape is a lot better than forcing your SOC to actually investigate something that you're just trialing out. And so making sure it doesn't become an alert from the get-go. Another great tool that you can use is any reporting solution. So if that's an Azure Monitor workbook, or if you're creating tables or graphs with your querying language, these are different ways, even a Tableau dashboard, some way for you to visualize the activity of an organization before you actually create the alert is really important. And then lastly, be aware of what tools an organization has. And as I said, a lot of organizations are just trying to figure out where they make their investment. For that topic that I brought about, where you have users signing in from different areas, some identity solutions, I bet Okta does this, I know Azure Active Directory does this, but they have some tolerance mechanisms that you can build in, and different SIM platforms have anomaly configurations where you can let it know how much risk tolerance to have. And so some configurations where you don't even have to code or query anything, you can just configure the tools. But that takes some scaling out, that organizations just need someone to compile the data to say, this is where you need to make the investment. Hopefully that answered.
Yeah, I was wondering if I can maybe ask a follow-up question regarding that, if we have time, if there's no other questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. So my follow-up question to that is, The explanation, thank you for the great explanation. It sounds like a lot of the techniques or tools we use is more of just like a code rule-based algorithm rather than like an ML type algorithm for the solutions. Is that true, or is it a misunderstanding on my end?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, for organizations that are trying to build up their security practice, they just don't have the skill sets to build ML-based solutions. They rely on vendors that create products to do that. Vendors do heavily rely on machine learning. And that's what I meant by when I called out anomalies specifically, which are studying behavior analytics. And so usually you see that work from a vendor perspective. Largely invested in SOCs will have a machine learning focus where they use specifically a tool called Jupyter Notebooks to build out code-based hunting or machine learning to perform detections. And it's just typically that requires a larger investment because of the skill shortage.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jordan, we have a couple minutes left and also a couple questions. So from Ryan Frauback, realistically, how effective are over-the-counter antivirus programs? Are they 50% effective, if that?
So definitely, I think the best resource to look at this, I'm almost biting my tongue as I'm about to say it, but you can look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant. But a lot of them are, especially in the leader quadrant, I've heard are extremely effective. Almost every, if not all, CSPMs or security posture management tools will recommend that as a highly critical thing to do. It's just they don't capture everything. They are effective and they're really good at capturing the very critical signs, but definitely there's more work that needs to be done, but that is a critical step for any organization. Typically, when I hear about organizations looking at tooling, the first things that they do is get an identity protection solution. They get an antivirus solution and they get an endpoint protection. So EDR, endpoint detection and response. Those are the first tools that I usually hear about for an organization trying to increase their tooling.
All right, and then two more questions and then we'll end there. Mm-hmm. From Ahmed Mapara, any data science query related tools that you would recommend other than using Power BI and other big names? Thanks.
Yeah, I would say the area that I see the majority of queries being built to monitor security signals is actually the SIEM space, security information and event management. And so those platforms are used to detect threats, and they are composed of many, many queries. And some are built using machine learning, others are manually written. In fact, the vast majority are manually written using a query language. The players in that space is Microsoft with Azure Sentinel, a product that I work on. There's also Splunk, there's ArcSight, QRadar, and that's where typically you'll see the majority of query writing, either from a reporting landscape, so building those visualizations as you called out with the question, but also for building the actual detections and threats. And all organizations that have a SIEM platform have a need for someone to actually build those queries for them and understand what the trends are for their organization. And was there one more question?
Yep, we're going to do one more question from YouTube from Mod 429. Hi, Jordan. Thank you, first of all. I want to ask your opinion on data governance and the role of BI in cybersecurity, especially when we are talking about the data side rather than the IT side.
Okay, data governance. Maybe if you could expand a little bit more while I'm answering, but maybe you're talking about, who has access to the data. Or maybe you're asking about, how long the data can or should be stored and accessible or monitored. So I guess I'll try to answer both. Nathan, cut me off if they do further clarify. But it's really important to set the RBAC. Who has role-based access control to these data sets? Because it can include personally identifiable information, and depending on which platform, maybe people can delete aspects of security data. And so it's probably the first milestone that someone does. They set up a security platform or logging, and the second thing they do after they set it up is they define who can do what to it. It's so important because with security data, one, it's signs that your data has been compromised, but it's also, someone could steal that information. And one of the most important things to monitor when it comes to security is internal theft or internal manipulation of data sources. So data loss prevention is really important to look at. There's solutions out there that monitor that, but it starts with making sure that you have proper roles identified and identities set up of who can do what. And then it really just depends on where you are in the world, what industry you're in terms of what the regulation is, in terms of how your organization is required to retain that data. I hope that answered okay. But if there's not a further,
there wasn't a follow-up, so
okay,
I think you're good.
Maybe I got it.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, everyone, and a big thank you to Jordan for presenting today. That's all the time we have. If you want to connect with Jordan, we'll get the slides posted with this recorded video on our website. And if you RSVP to the event, I'll send everybody an email with the recording. On July 12th, we will be having another webinar with Nicholas Renault, a data science specialist at IBM. He's going to be talking about how to forecast sales using Profit and Python in 15 lines of code. If you're interested in that, please go ahead and RSVP. Thank you again for joining, and thank you, Jordan, for giving such a great presentation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.